Good morning. How y'all doing this morning? Good. So as you can see, we're doing something a little different today. It's been a while since we've done one of these, but today we're doing a round table. It's just a different way of preaching. It's a different style. We're super excited for it. So I guess last year, Jenna and I personally were going through a really rough patch in our marriage where we really didn't know what we were going to do. And so we decided to go to another church. We committed 16 weeks on a Tuesday night to do a program called Re-Engage. And we loved it. It impacted our marriage in a really good way. And so we thought we needed to bring it to Endeavor. And so at the beginning of this year, we did a 4-week sermon series on marriage where Pastor Kyle and Jessica talked about intimacy, emotional and physical. Pastor Nick Edwards and his wife did communication. I cannot remember the other pastor's name, who did another series. And then me and Jenna finished it off with forgiveness and talking about, the struggles that we were going through to kick off Re-Engage here. And we had a really good first group. I think we started off with 10, 11 couples, and it went really well. So these are 3 of the couples that participated, and today they're just going to talk about their experience with Re-Engage, how it impacted their marriage. And then also on the board is my phone number. If you have any questions that you want to ask to the group, you can go ahead and text it to me and see if we can get it fit in as well. But first, we're going to have everybody introduce themselves, starting off with Pastor Kyle.
I'm Kyle. What all do you want us to say about ourselves?
Just a little bit about yourself, what you do here.
Well, I like the beach. No, I'm just
A
kidding.
little bit about your family.
I have a beautiful wife that's sitting next to me. We have a cute little daughter in the back somewhere. I hope someone has her.
Brooke has her.
Someone has her. And then we got 2 little crazy, wild boys in our children's department that are probably like tearing it up back there. Them pastor kids. Next.
I'm Jessica. I'm his wife. Our kids are in there.
You're more than just my wife.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been taking care of everything this week because he's ditched me for all of your kids this week. He was at
Yeah, don't thank me, thank her.
he was at youth camp. So
Yeah, all the dogs, all the chickens, all the ducks,
all our
litters
kids.
of puppies. All them kids. Yeah.
Yeah, Jessica does a lot for the church and for Kyle. If we didn't have Jessica, we definitely wouldn't have Kyle.
Nope.
And Jessica's the best part of Kyle. I think we could all agree to that. So.
Facts.
You also
Can I get
wouldn't
an
have
amen?
Kyle if it wasn't for my mom because she birthed me.
Oh.
So there's that too. I got to give credit,
Yeah.
I'm Sandra. Kevin's not here. He's at work this morning. There we go.
Sandra also does a lot for this church, and then as well for me and my wife personally. Just the fact that my mom and my whole family lives on the other side of the country, and so Sandra's been a big blessing to me and my wife just as we go through life. She's been over to our house at midnight when stuff's going wrong, so she's just been a big blessing for us. So she's not just Sandra; she's a lot to this church. Ope.
I'm Ope. I'm Tim's wife. I have 2 boys, and I'm pretty sure they're also tearing up back there with your kids.
They're tearing it
so-
up together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to keep each other busy. And I go here.
Ope doesn't just go here. Ope is Tim and Ope have been going here since October, November, and they jumped in serving. Ope is part of our greeting team, so everybody gets to see her beautiful smile every Sunday morning. Also, the best part of Tim. So, Tim, go ahead.
Hey, I'm Tim, Opie's husband. I'm part of the setup team, and just happy to be here.
Yes, and again, Tim also does a lot for our church. He serves in the tech team, the setup team. Essentially, anything that we need him to do, he will always say yes. He doesn't say no. So sometimes I may take advantage of that. For sure, yeah. Anyway, alrighty. So the first question I have for y'all guys. What were your initial hesitation or doubts before joining Re-Engage, and then how did those change once it started and as we were going through it? We can start anywhere.
Um, I thought it would show how many unresolved problems we had, all the cracks and faults, and I was also worried that our marriage was not as strong as I thought it was. And going through the program, it kind of showed me that this was definitely necessary. There was definitely room for growth and improvement, and that our faults and problems were not the end of the world, and we're not the only ones going through them. So that definitely helped me a lot.
So me going into it, I kind of had a poor attitude going into it. We have a busy schedule, but Jesse really wanted to do this. So how this program works is it's like 16 weeks, right?
Yep.
16 weeks, every week. You have homework during the week, so it's a commitment. And so I'm like, we don't have time for this. Also, I was pretty sure it was just going to be like Jessica complaining about everything I did wrong. And so I was like, it's kind of like marriage counseling. We've done marriage counseling before, and I was against that. I'm for counseling, right? But when it comes to my own personal life, I'm like, okay, we're going to go into this counseling session, and they're going to write me a new one, and they're going to side with Jessica, especially if the counselor's a woman. They're definitely going to see all my faults, and it's going to be all my fault. And so I'm kind of like, that was kind of my attitude going into it. I'm going to show up, but I know it's going to just be like, Kyle's a bad person. That obviously is not how it went, right? I may be a bad person, but that's not how it was. That wasn't my worries of it wasn't the program. How it goes is it's not Jessica complaining about me. It's not me complaining about Jessica. It's kind of working on ourselves. And so the attitude of this is going to take so much time. This is such a huge commitment. Well, also that's marriage. Marriage is all of your time, and it's a huge commitment. So just bad attitude all the way around. But we got a lot out of it. So
I knew his attitude about it, and after going to marriage counseling, I just sort of knew his attitude about not necessarily working on our marriage, but just going through a program. So going into it, I was just like, this isn't going to be worth my time. He's not going to put effort into it, and it just made me really not, like he said, it's a commitment. I don't want to commit time to it if he's not going to commit time to it. But then when you start going through it, like he said, it's all about you. It's inward focused. So even if your spouse isn't doing it, that's not the focus anyway. Your focus is on you and how you're improving your relationship with God, and through that, you're improving your relationship with your spouse. And so it really changed my heart about how whether or not he works on our marriage, it's my job to work on my relationship with God and my relationship with him. I can't blame all of our problems on him, all of this, and this. I have to take ownership of that too. And so I think that was helpful for both of us, because I think in marriage a lot of times you get so used to blaming that you never look inward. And so that was a good thing for both of us through this, was to figure out how we could grow ourselves to grow together.
Well, Kevin signed us up. I didn't know until, I guess, a week before it started. And we've been married for 34 years, so we're at a very different place than the other couples that were there. So that was one of my concerns. And then the other concern was I didn't want to, since my son and his wife were there, I didn't want him to feel like they couldn't be open and honest and true with what they were going through because we were there, which turned out to be totally wrong. I got more out of this, I think, than Kevin did. Of course, that's just my opinion. I've got to stay in my circle. But it was fantastic. Every week, God spoke to me more and more as I listened.
after me and Jesse giving a sermon together about our sex life, you shouldn't be worried about if I'm going to be open or not. It's going to happen. So
I know, but there's always one lesson about sex, and it's just like, ugh.
And they already talked about it.
Oh, I think when I started that sermon, they left, right? They walked out of the
Your
room.
dad walked out, yeah.
The baby.
I was afraid that it was just going to dredge up a lot of unprocessed and unprocessed things in our marriage, and it would lead to a lot of fighting. But what ended up coming up from it was being given the tools to then process and go through it in a really healthy way that builds yourself up, but in building yourself up, you then have the power and ability to hold up your marriage as well. And it just almost like a reframing of how you approach a marriage, not only through like how you interact with your spouse, but how you interact with God to then interact with your spouse. And it was, thank you guys for, running it.
Yeah. So that brings up a good point. I guess I didn't really explain what Reengage actually is, other than it's like a marriage study. So like Kyle said, it's 16 weeks, and each week has a different chapter. And whether it's love, conflict, intimacy, a bunch of just 16 chapters worth of stuff, and it's like a page and a half worth of reading, which isn't a lot of reading, Kyle. And it asks you 4 or 5 questions about that chapter and what your thoughts on it were. What's that?
It asks you a few more than that,
4, 5, 6.
In-depth
Whatever.
questions.
In depth.
And so the whole idea behind it is, and this goes into the next question, is stay in your circle. So the idea behind stay in your circle is you cannot talk about your spouse at all. And I say it from the beginning, and I tell them I'm going to say it a lot. Stay in your circle, stay in your circle. The whole idea is you're working on yourself. And like Tim said, it doesn't necessarily give you all the answers to your problems, but it allows you to deal with conflict. It gives you the tools to work on conflict and different issues better. So when it comes to staying in your circle, what were your guys' initial thoughts on it? Because I know it's hard. And then how has it changed your approach to marriage now that Reengage is over?
Let me just give you an example. So when we're sitting in the Reengage class and we start to share our answers, and you say, well, immediately it's met with stay in your circle. Well, he does this, or the reason I do this is stay in your circle. Like, that's how it works. Like, you're literally not allowed to talk. I'm not allowed to talk about how Jessica responds to things. So initially, like, that's a problem for me, right? Because I don't know how y'all's conflict goes in relationships, but the way it runs in the Stewart household is if I have a problem with Jessica, I'm trying to stay in my circle. The way it goes is if I have a problem with Jessica and I mention it to Jessica, immediately Jessica has a problem with me, and vice versa. If there's something wrong and she has something to say to me, like, you did this wrong, I'm going to clap back with, oh, well, what about this? Or the reason I did it was because you did it. That's the way conflict works in our house. And are we alone on this?
No.
Okay, thank you, Jesus. Okay, so that's how it works in our house. So the whole idea of, like, Kyle, mind your business and talk about yourself is really foreign to me. And so I think the whole group struggled, like, the first couple, maybe the first month, right? And we were all, like, the whole time, it was like, stay in your circle, stay in your circle, stay in your circle. But it gets you to think a little bit deeper about a conflict that's happening and what you did in the conflict. Not so much about what she did, and vice versa. So I think the concept of that helped us a lot, or helped me a lot. That's staying in my circle.
Good job.
I mean, it's pretty much the same thing he said. Just for example, one of the weeks was we were reflecting over a passage of scripture, and it said, what ways have you been angry, and what ways have you been selfish, and what ways have you been prideful, and what ways have you been lazy? I mean, those are all causing you to self-reflect, and then you have a conversation with your spouse about these things. And so when you're talking about, I've been angry because, you're all inward focused, and he's not getting the chance to say, oh yes, like agree, like it's giving your spouse a chance. It takes away that, oh, what am I going to say? What am I going to say? And it just gives you the listening. And I think so much in our relationships, communication is the biggest breakdown. Whether that's our marriage relationship or other relationships, communication is always a problem. And it's because I think we're always listening to respond instead of listening to internalize. And staying in your circle really helps take away that problem. Is if you're staying in your circle, you're not listening with how am I going to come back, how am I going to come back, how am I come back. You're listening with, oh, that's how they feel. And I think that's an important thing is we feel very differently about a lot of situations, and so we're not always on the same page because that feeling part is where it's different. And so it's like he has to take a step back, and it's like, okay, this isn't how it actually happened necessarily, but it's how she took it, how she felt about it. And same with me, as I have to hear that's how he felt, and it just gives them a chance to air the problems without making it a bigger issue.
That's a big deal. Like, if you're talking to your wife and she feels a certain way, it doesn't matter how you meant it. If she's hurting, right? If she feels lonely or something, like, may not be reality, but it's how she feels and it needs to be addressed. So, amen to what you said.
And then there's the opposite side of that. Like, one thing that really helped Jenna and I as we went through this was like taking a personal accountability for different situations. When you have to reflect on your actions in something, you have to come up and admit, oh, this is my role that I played regardless of what you did. So by staying in your circle, it also helps accountability aspect, and that makes it easier, for vulnerability.
I said it was hard because we had formulated like a we mindset. Society's just like, when you're married, it's we, it's us, it's just togetherness all the time. And so I was just like, his business is my business, and sort of vice versa. So it kind of made it hard because I would want to, like, oh no, that's not what Tim's thinking. This is what you're thinking. He was like, oh yeah, please talk for me. And because I'm like, I know him better than he knows himself. At least so I think I do. So it kind of helped me with learning to stay in my lane because I can't think for Tim. Tim's been thinking for himself before he met me, and he'll be thinking for himself while we're together as well. And it helped me realize that I'm not always right as well. Like, I can do me without having to worry about what Tim's doing. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. Oh, and also making assumptions, because that leads to fights.
I kind of mentioned it earlier, reframing how you think, but it makes you stop and assess what you're going to say and why you're going to say it in the first place. Because if you're going into an argument thinking, I'm here to talk to you because of something you did, and you have to stop and think about that, 50% of what you're going to say to your partner ends up out of the window anyways, because you're having to assess why you feel the way you do, and it's because you had selfish, I know I'm jumping ahead, but selfish expectations, selfish wants, and it stops a lot of how you think, and it reframes it, and it's a really good way to slow yourself down.
For me, it was more painful than I thought. I am a master deflector. So when we argue, I can get him off track like I'm a pro at it, which is not a good thing. So forcing us to stay in our circle made me examine me. And that's not something I wanted to do. It's not something that I had fun doing, but it has made a difference for me. It's made me listen to what he really thinks rather than what I'm thinking for him. And so it was hard. It was very hard. When you get into that cycle of always thinking you know more, it's hard to break.
I feel like it also helped with the conflict because I felt like when we would have an argument or a fight, whatever you want to call it, I was always ready with the next because I already knew how it was going to go because I could work him. And like you said, like before he could even say anything, I'm like, oh, it's because of this, and I'll say this, and he's like, you're right. Like I said, I was right. And it's something I'm working on because I know I can be very argumentative, and like I have A, B, C, subsection D, and I'm just ready for it. And I realize that he's not the enemy, and he's not trying to attack me, and it's the kids.
It's the kids. The kids are the enemy.
Amen. Amen.
I
They're the
cannot
real.
relate.
They're the enemy.
Yeah.
I can't relate. I don't have kids. Got a
You're
couple
going
dogs.
to one day.
Yeah, I've got a couple dogs.
It is habitual, like they were saying, and it does become easy to speak for your spouse and speak for each other. Even after going through this, it doesn't mean you're perfect. It doesn't mean you have it down. We were going through the questions that Chandler sent us, specifically this question, and I told Kyle, well, I just don't feel like we really stay in our circle anymore. And he's like, I think about staying in my circle every time we have a conversation. Like, it's something I actively say in my head. And so again, it's just like, oh, well, I guess I'm not staying in my circle because I was saying that for both of us. Just because I maybe haven't actively been saying it to myself or haven't been hearing him verbalize it doesn't mean he's not doing it. Again, like Tim was saying, it's those assumptions that we make. So it just helps with you not making those assumptions, not speaking for your partner all of the time.
That's good. So out of the 16 chapters, 16 weeks, which chapter stood out to you guys the most and why?
For me, it was communication, focusing on your negative communication patterns, which really stood out to me because 75% of how I was communicating with Opie was negative, and it was like just real eye-opening in terms of like, no wonder I can't work anything out with her because I'm negatively interpreting, I am shutting down, and I just flip-flop between the two of those, and it's like, oh, yeah. that
So you're
makes
being
sense.
a weenie.
I'm being a weenie.
Okay, so in the book, the way they break it down for negative communication patterns is being a weenie. So W, withdrawal, I, invalidate, N, negatively interpretate, and I, instigate,
Sounds right.
withdrawal. I can't remember off the top of my head. And so a lot of times we would say, don't be a weenie, because that's how it broke it down. So that's what we're talking about with the negative communication patterns.
I think for me, the
Escalate. That was-
I don't even know if it's a chapter, but it would be chapter 1 or maybe before chapter 1. When when you get this book, you have to rate your marriage. Okay, so everyone individually has to rate your marriage, and then you have to talk to your spouse about it. So to be like, maybe you already know this, but I kind of live in a bubble sometimes, where I either think it's like whatever situation is like the worst situation, or I live in a bubble that's like really good. And I was under the assumption that our marriage was really good. Okay, right? We love each other. Everything is working. We're on the same team. I'm kind of thinking I'm a good husband because like I'll do dishes. I do laundry. Like I like take care of some stuff. So I'm like, I'm pretty sure I got like a 9. And I'm like, I rate our marriage really good. So I rated it, I don't know what I rated it, like 8, 9, 7, something high. And then so I'm telling her, and she's like, I could see that she's getting really anxious and like, oh no. And I'm like, wait, it's not going to go the way I thought it was going to go. And so I don't know what you rated me, but I'm pretty sure it was like a 2 or a 3. Like very extremely low. And I was... It was our marriage. And so I was like, it was so shocking to me that she felt that way, and I had no idea that she felt that way. And immediately I was like, you know what? That attitude of like, this is a stupid study turned into like, okay, I didn't know we needed this, but now I'm gonna take this serious, because if who wants their wife to think that their marriage is a 2 on a scale of 10? That's terrible. That makes you feel horrible, right? And so it's kind of an eye-opener to like, I think that we think very differently about life. And I'm like, the last thing I want is my wife to feel like our marriage is a 2, when my job is to make sure she is fulfilled in all of those aspects of our marriage. So I think mine was before the first chapter.
Hey,
Yikes.
gotta start somewhere.
Yep.
It was a 3. It's a little bit better than a 2.
Okay.
I just like to
Whoa,
say.
I thought it was a 2.
For me, the one that really made a difference was forgiveness, which is funny because forgiveness is such a basic part of being a Christian. And I think sometimes that makes us sort of glaze over what forgiveness really is. And before you talked about what forgiveness is, you talked about what forgiveness is not. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is not reconciling. Forgiveness is not condoning. And for me, the one that really hit was forgiveness is not a feeling. If you wait until you feel like forgiving, you never will. Forgiveness is a choice you make sometimes in spite of how you feel. And I realized that was I was holding on to a lot of things because it's like, well, I'm still hurt by what he said or by what he did, so I'm just not going to forgive him. But that's not the point. The point is we are called to forgive. There's a lot of things that we do that hurt Jesus and God, and he still died on the cross and forgave us of those things. And so we're still called to forgive our spouse even though they hurt us. Often, like it says, in spite of how you feel, you're called to forgive. But again, that goes back to the beginning. Forgiving doesn't mean you have to forget. That's something you talk about, and through this, it walks you through how to forgive your spouse. And again, it goes back to staying in your circle. It's, I need forgiveness for this, and you're just having this open conversation. And something else that really stood out is you have to say, I forgive you, after they say each thing, and I didn't realize how much you need to hear those words, because sometimes, Chandler even said this, it's sometimes a fight happens and your spouse doesn't even know you're still angry about it. Like they just go on about their day and he'll be like, why are you mad? It's like, you said this. And so you need that closure of that, I forgive you, to know that that feeling is over, that fight is over. And so,
Can anyone else relate with that, where they're like, why is she still mad? I didn't even know she was. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's me. Okay.
For example, I talked about how oftentimes me and Jenna get in a little something, and I'm the one who's upset and mad, and so she's in the bedroom like upset, thinking I'm just mad as mad can be, and 20 minutes later, and I completely forgot about what we talked about. And so she'll come out, I'll come in the bedroom, and she'll look at me like, and I'm in there smiling, having a conversation. She's like, aren't you upset? I'm like, about what? I forgot. So she thought I was still upset, and so she had no idea I was over it, because my memory is like real small.
The second chapter for me, it was about brokenness. And one of the first sentences you read is, I am my biggest marital problem. Well, that just made me mad. No. And then I had to read this one every day for a couple of weeks to really process it all the way, because I didn't realize how much hurt, how much things that I have in my past that I'd never dealt with, or I had just pushed it down, raising 3 kids, having, being a teacher. You're busy. And it forced me to have to stop and really look at myself, and that's not something that I like to do. And it was really difficult for me to get through this chapter, because I had to dig in and find out what all that was about, because I didn't want to admit that part of the reasons we've had struggles, and all the time we've been together was my fault. It was things that either I did or didn't do. And so that is something I had to deal with. And then the chapter about forgiveness, I didn't realize I had so many things that I needed forgiveness for, where, the focus had always been, well, Kevin, you did this, and it forced me to look at me. Just holding a mirror up and seeing yourself is difficult when you don't want to see yourself that way.
I don't know how everyone else chose 1. I had 3. Probably more, to be honest. So I had expectations, sexual intimacy, and conflict. And I feel like mine all kind of go hand in hand.
We're a church plant, y'all. We ain't got that much money.
So with expectations, I have a knack of setting too many expectations and then majority of them are unspoken expectations. I then get mad and turn at Tim when he doesn't do what I want him to do. So it could be like, the trash can's dirty. I don't think I should have to tell you to, clean out the trash can, but I don't voice that out. And then then it gets nasty, and I'm like, see, why didn't you clean out the trash can? He's like, well, why didn't you tell me? I'm like, why didn't you see it? And then that leads to conflict. And then I used to think that conflict was bad, but going through this, it literally says conflict is okay. It's just how you respond to it. And because I was like, I hate it when we fight. I don't want us to fight. And then it leads to avoidance, which is being a weenie. It just kind of, it's like a full circle in general. And then sexual intimacy. Mom, please close your ears. Finding our happy medium when it came to sex. Seeing myself how Tim sees me. And then another thing it said is a great sex life doesn't happen by accident. It will take a lot of communication, prayer, humility, and service to improve your intimacy, but it is worth it. It is worth the work to fully enjoy God's gift of sex in marriage. Because, when you think about like sexual intimacy and God, you're like, oh, that's kind of, you don't want to talk about that with God, but God created sex for marriage, and that's something we definitely like struggled with because, what was it? I was a avoider? No, what was it? You were a... Yes, and I didn't think that was something I could go to God to pray about, because I'm like, hey, God, can you tell my husband to leave me alone? Like, but during the sermon, we talked about how sometimes it doesn't have to be like a full production. Sometimes it could be a little drive-through, and Mom, don't look at me, please. And once we kind of figure that out, and like also since having kids, like a lot of that has changed in how I see myself, and getting our kids out of our room has just made a world of a difference, because that's something we prayed about, not to just kick the kids out of the room, but just like figuring out what works for us, and making sure my husband's happy, I'm happy, and because our conflict also arises from sexual intimacy and expectations. So we're still a work in progress.
Thank you for sharing that. This one might kind of piggyback off of this last one, but can you pinpoint a specific moment or session that was a turning point for you in your marriage?
Yeah, I'm not sure which chapter it was. I think it was emotional intimacy, but how you look at your relationship with your wife or your spouse, and it reflected in how you view the relationship of God, that you have with God, rather. I realized that in creating a transactional relationship with Ope, I was then in turn doing the exact same thing with God. I didn't realize how long I had spent forming God in my image rather than seeing myself built in his image. And it changed how I approached God, because that's how I was approaching Ope. And so when I stopped looking for emotional fulfillment and physical fulfillment through Ope, which I can do. She's my wife, she's my partner, it's all there, but I wasn't first seeking God and intimacy with him, and it just reframed how that was structured within my mind. And so that was life-changing, I would say, just how I approached that.
I think for me, there wasn't like a chapter that was a turning point, but it was the constant, like, week in and week out of putting time into it. So like you do the study by yourself, and then you have a conversation with your wife about it, and then you go and you talk further about it. So it was like the 16 weeks, which is like a while of like really putting time and energy every other day, pretty much that's what it equals to, every other day, like specifically sitting down and focusing on sharing and listening. And we hadn't really had, once, we don't go on a ton of dates anymore. We don't do a lot of that stuff, so there's not a lot of like talking without screaming kids or just craziness. So that was nice for us to do that, and I feel like we've not so much so as like the structure of like 3 times a week we're talking about our marriage, but we do go to each other, especially on very chaotic days. You wake up and like based on your kid's attitude or your spouse's attitude, this is about to be a rough day. Like you can tell kind of right out of the gate. And so we go to each other now on those days like, okay, so for us to be successful today, what do you need? And she'll say, I need you not to gripe at me about how the house looks. I need you not to gripe about this. And she'll say, what do you need from me? I don't need any eye rolling today. I don't need any type of attitude. If we can both do that, then we're going to have a good day. And so, like, checking in on each other, I think, has helped us a lot. I don't know. What do you think?
Sort of like he said, I don't think it was any one chapter that made a big difference. It was the week in and week out. Ever since we planted this church, I've either been pregnant or had a newborn. So there's a lot of times that I've used that as a cop-out of, well, I can't commit to this study because I'm going to have a screaming baby, or I can't do the study in between. But for some reason, this one just felt different to us. Like, it was just like, I have to do this for my kids. It wasn't I'm going to use my kids as a crutch. It's, I have to do this for my kids. Our, sort of like we've been saying, is conflict is a part of life. Communication is a part of life. And so we want to be the best example we can be to them. And that is working on our marriage and them seeing a healthy marriage, healthy communication, healthy conflict resolution. There were a lot of times where one of us was sitting on the floor walking around the room with a screaming baby, but we still went. And I think it showed me the level of commitment Kyle had to it. It wasn't like, Ruth's just going to scream, let's just not go. It's, Caleb won't go upstairs with the kids, we're going to have 2 kids with us, let's just not go. It was, no, we're going to keep doing this, fighting for our marriage sort of thing. So I think just the commitment that we were both putting into it, seeing that was really changing for me.
To see the change in Kevin week to week, one of the things that he asked, what do I need to have a good day? When I get home, I need a hug. The second semester for me was extremely stressful. So when I came home every day, I was just depleted, absolutely just depleted. And he would meet me at the door every single day with a hug. And it was just that simple. It allowed me to take a breath, to breathe. And then I had to look at myself and say, well, what am I doing for him? How am I helping him to be able to just breathe? So for the 3rd chapter was about grace and about having a works-based marriage versus a grace-based marriage. And a couple of things that stuck out for me was I'm making Kevin climb over walls and bust through walls that he didn't put up. Things that, like I said, unmet, things that I hadn't forgiven myself for or ever dealt with. He didn't even realize I was dealing with it, and I didn't either. And he was having to climb that wall when it wasn't fair for him to have to try to climb it. And then the other thing that was said was, listen, not as a victim, but as a trusting partner. We're a team. We both want what's best for each other. So I need to listen with those ears as well as react as a partner, not a victim.
I would kind of agree with everyone else with saying like the whole study, but the truth one really stood out to me because the lies that it said were very spot on with the things that you believe. So one of them was, my marital issues and problems are different or unique. And no, that's not true. My marriage shouldn't be this hard, and my marriage and spouse is supposed to make me happy. So going through those questions and like doing it with a group setting was awesome. Not the fact that people have problems, but the fact that, like, man, you too, because everyone has, like, you think everyone's so happy. You watch, you know, social media is such a big thing today. Like, you watch all these happy YouTube couples and TikTok families, and they all look like they have it put together, but they're just putting on a good front for what they're showing. And it was nice to talk to others just like us with young kids. And it was so amazing, especially when you guys opened up, because I was like, there's no way they're not, like, not perfect. But you guys are still great, don't get me wrong.
She obviously didn't hang out with us before this marriage started.
Yeah.
Or she would have realized we ain't perfect before that.
But it was great having other people like, hey, we're going through this too, and, you know, we've tried this, or, you know, this is what we're going through. And it was also especially great when you guys shared, because I'm like, 30-something years, like, that's amazing. You guys did something right along the way, so it was nice having, like, different ends of the spectrum, like, been married for goals. We're praying for that too. So thank you.
I mean, going off of that, I think it was Chandler a couple weeks ago was talking about isolation. The devil is fighting to isolate you, and it does feel like, why is our marriage so bad when everyone else's marriage is so good? But we're not seeing their marriage behind closed doors, and so that was nice. Was we were all coming together and we were revealing. We weren't just dogging on our marriages, because obviously we don't all hate our marriages, but it was letting us get to say, oh, yes, I do feel that way sometimes, but we still have this. And so it was just that isolation that the devil uses is, we're alone in this. And so being able to have that time to share, not just with each other, but as a group, and hear that we're not alone was really changing too.
Especially if the goal of marriage and the point of marriage is to reflect the love that Christ has for us. That's the biggest, like, illustration that God gives us for his love to us, is our marriage. So if we choose that we're going to isolate our marriage and hide from everything and put on this front, like those YouTube couples, which are the worst, so annoying, then we're just falling into the plan that Satan has for us, just to,
Yeah.
like a pointless, useless marriage.
Okay, we're running short on time, so 2 quick last questions. I'm going to adjust the last one, but I did get a text from someone, and Kyle, you're going to answer this one. I'm putting you on the spot for this. So, based off of what Opie was saying about the intimacy, this person has a question about the drive-through. Is that meaning in the actual drive-through, or is that the meaning something else?
So let me just go on
explain
this.
it. Yeah,
It can be in the actual drive-through. No, I'm kidding. Well, I guess it could. No, so a few months ago when we talked about sexual intimacy, I was giving the example that sex doesn't always have to be this, like, you get her roses and chocolates and you get dressed up and you go out to a fancy dinner, and then there's the dessert, and then there's all
Our
this
anniversary is next week. I want roses and a fancy dinner.
stuff. Okay, you gonna get it. So, like, I was putting that into context of sex. So sometimes sex can be a big production where it's like all the things and everything is perfect and all the stuff, but sometimes it's like Chili's, where it's not fast food, but it's not like a steak dinner. It's a little bit of some stuff, but not everything. And then the drive-through is just like, we got kids on the other side of this door. Let's make it happen. We got, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 10 minutes. I don't know. We only got a few minutes, and we got to get out of here. But some type of intimacy is better than nothing. There has to be that.
Because you said you do not want to send them out into the world thirsty or hungry.
Yeah, you can't send your man, your wife out. Yeah, you got
Okay.
gotta. Oh, okay, we're getting off track.
Anyway, so yes, it is. All right, last question. I'm kind of adjust it. Take a quick second to talk about how your spouse has changed because of reengage. Brag on your spouse for a little bit. You can get out of your circle.
So Opie has really changed up how she approaches me. She approaches me with love and respect, which, I mean, fills my cup, man. Like, not coming out at me with like out the side of her neck and the eye rolls. It's coming to me like we're really going to solve this, and like just the love that's there now, and like it's meaningful through our conversation. So thank you.
Tim is more open with his emotions. Our intimacy is far more than physical. We can sit and talk, and we can have long conversations, and, you know, I don't feel like we fight about, like, meaningful things. Or if we do have an argument, like, typically, like, our arguments could go on for, I'm petty, it could go on for till the end of the day, sometimes longer. But now it's like within like 10 minutes, you're like, hey, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it like that. Or, you know, we're definitely quicker to apologize. And he doesn't just let me be right. He'll like explain it to me. So I'm like, okay, thank you for that. Yeah. And he's not like attitudey because I give him attitude. So he's really, really patient with me. My mom knows.
Tim is so dreamy.
He's the nice one. He really is. So I love you. Thank you.
I think mine would be for Jessie that before this study, there was a lot of like, when I would come to her with an issue, it was a lot of like victim-y kind of mindset, whereas now she's quick to apologize about things, and that's like a great quality to have, and that's how I've seen some of your growth.
For Kyle, I've noticed he's been a lot more aware of my feelings and nurturing of my feelings, even if he responds in a way that I don't like or isn't always quick to acknowledge my feelings. He'll see that it hurts me, and he'll come back and be like, look, I should have said this or this, and that's something I've really appreciated, is just sometimes it's not even about what he says, it's just acknowledging how I feel, and that's really made a difference for me as he's been more aware of that. And
Kevin has always said he doesn't understand how women function. I don't understand. How do you function? Because, you know, he knows we're messed up in the head. We think differently because we got 10 million things going on. But now he's more gentle with it. And he's like, gosh, I am so sorry you have all those thoughts in your head, but here's what I'm thinking. So he's very good about, you know, calming me down and saying, no, that's not, that I know that's what you heard, but here is what I meant. And that means a lot to me.
Yeah. So I think the biggest takeaway that I've noticed from listening to them talk about their responses to these questions, and just from what me and Jenna went through and the group that we had as well, again, re-engage does not fix your issues. You will have issues to the day you die. That's just part of being human, being sinful. That's just how we are. But it really does change your approach on how you deal with those issues. Because a lot of times we can allow a small thing to turn into a big thing, and something that should take 5 seconds ended up being, we're petty about it for the next 3 days. So it's just learning on how to deal with these issues better than what we already do. So I just want to thank all of you guys, and I think we should give them a round of hand for coming up here, being vulnerable, sharing. Vulnerability is not easy, especially when it's being recorded and in front of a bunch of people that you see on a weekly basis. So just throwing your information out there. I appreciate you guys doing it, and I really enjoyed being able to go through it with you guys, and then everybody else who was also in our group. You just want to go into announcements?